Hi, James Strong here with a different intro to the podcast than normally. The reason is this is a different podcast than we've normally had. I just came back from my semi-annual retreat to the desert. Spent 5 days out there in the desert by myself, off the grid, and not plugged into social media or anything. You've heard me speak many times about the Panamint Springs Resort. It's in Panamint Valley in Death Valley National Park, and it's truly a gem in the middle of the desert. I love that place. I've been going there for 30 years. I can't say enough good things about the Panamint Springs Resort. Well, what I was able to do this time is get an interview with one of the owners, Ben Castle. His family has owned the Panamint Springs Resort for about 14 years. They are making a go of it during this COVID-19 mess, and actually quite successfully, all things considered. This podcast consists of my interview with Ben Castle, one of the owners. Now, the audio quality is not the best, reason being, we're off the grid. The recording equipment was not what I normally have. We were outside. We had to deal with right on California Highway 190. So we dealt with car traffic noise. We were outside, and because of California laws and social distancing, we had masks on during the podcast. So we were socially distant outside next to a highway with masks. And, there was a swamp cooler that kept the resort restaurant open or cool while open, and that was humming in the background. So I will apologize for the audio quality not being what you're used to in the podcast. However, please understand that the material in the podcast is unbelievable, outstanding. And if you've ever wondered what it's like to be in the middle of nowhere, off the grid, and trying to run a business to make people smile, you'll want to listen to this podcast. So please enjoy the James Strong Show Podcast 190 with my special guest, Ben Castle from the Panamint Springs Resort. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 190, sorry. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the afternoon of Tuesday, October the 6th, from the Panamint Springs Resort in Panamint Springs, California. And my guest is one of the owners of the Panamint Springs Resort, Ben Castle. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, James. I'm happy to be here.
And this is podcast number 190. And right outside here is California Highway 190. What a coincidence.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I've been coming here, and I've talked on the podcast, on my radio show, to anybody who'll listen and some who won't, about what a cool place this has been. I've been coming here for 30 years. And your family took it over how many years ago?
We took it over on March 1st, 2006.
Okay.
So about 14 and a half years.
Okay, and the changes you folks have made have just been unbelievably incredible. But tell me a little bit of history about the Panamint Springs Resort, exactly where it is. It's not actually in Death Valley, but it's in Death Valley Park, correct?
So yeah, we're in the Panamint Valley. Death Valley National Park surrounds our property. We actually sit on private property inside Death Valley National Park. Death Valley National Park has many different valleys in it. Of course, Death Valley, Panamint Valley, Saline Valley, Eureka Valley, and a couple of smaller valleys like Greenwater Valley and Hidden Valley. So we're on the western edge of Death Valley National Park. The boundary is 1 mile to the south of us, and about 14 miles to the west of us. Death Valley became a national park in, I want to say it was 90, I always mess this up, it's either 94 or 96. Clinton signed the Desert Protection Act that turned Death Valley into a national park, whereas before it had been a national monument.
Really? And I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it dramatically increased the size of the park. Trump just added another, I want to say 200,000 acres at the beginning of this year. And it is the largest park in the lower 48. It has the lowest point in the continental United States, and the area is something like 3.6 million acres now. So it's larger than the state of Rhode Island.
Unbelievable. And it gets hot.
It does from time to time get hot. There are about 4 months out of the year where triple digits are really common, if not just the standard course. But the rest of the year, it's quite lovely. Our winters are very mild, unless you're in the high country, because this is a basin and range type landscape. So we've got some very high mountains, and we've got some very deep valleys. And so the valley floors are really lovely in the wintertime, and the mountain peaks are really lovely in the summertime. The basin and range topography is actually what allows us to get the world records on temperatures, because the prevailing wind comes over from the Pacific Ocean. Death Valley's landscape was made, or is continuing to be made, by the Pacific Plate smashing into the North American Plate, and all of the mountains are created by uplift, and they all happen to run north and south. So the cool air coming over from the Pacific Ocean has to get up over the Sierras, which aren't that far away. We're here at Panamint Springs, we're equidistant from the lowest point in the continental United States to the highest point in the lower 48, Mount Whitney.
So Badwater to Whitney, you're right smack dab in the middle.
Right exactly in the middle. So the cool air coming over from the ocean has to get up over the highest point of the Sierras, and then it comes over the Owens Valley, and then it hits the Argus Range, the Coastal Range, and then the Argus Range, and then the Panamint Range, and the valleys are all really narrow, and there's very little vegetation, very sparse vegetation. So as the sun beats down, and the rocks can only collect so much of that solar radiation before they start giving off heat, and that heat rises. So you've got this rising heat pattern that then that cold air hits, and it really just pushes that cold air over to the next mountain range, and the hot air gets curled down to go down for another heat cycle. So these valleys actually become really giant convection ovens, and that's how we're able to get the high temperatures. And it's totally because of the topography.
And you in Death Valley hit 130 degrees this summer.
Hit 130 degrees. I want to say for 4 consecutive days it was at 130.
Now I know you guys are a tad higher, so you're a tad cooler.
We saw 122 when Death Valley saw 130. So not as bad.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it only once, and I promise I won't say it again. But it's a dry heat.
That is true. I will take 120 and 5% humidity versus 85, 85.
I will say that I've been here. 118 is as hot as it's been when I've been here, and friend, that's just hot. In just a little bit of time, the heat sucks the water out of your body.
Oh yeah,
it just does. But you mentioned, you get up in the mountains, and in fact, I'm just now coming back. I climbed Wild Rose today. I summited at 12:53 today. And in theory, it should take you less time to get down than up, but I always have trouble getting down because my knees don't want to take downhill.
I'm right there with you. Up is definitely more aerobic, but down is way harder on the knees. So you're sitting about a little bit more than 10,000 feet less than the elevation that you summited today. So we're just under 2,000 feet in elevation here. Just to give you an idea of the vast elevation changes in this park.
And that's about the third time I've done Wild Rose. Wild Rose is something you can do in a day.
Easy, yeah.
Telescope, not so much. For me, Telescope, I've got to spend a day acclimating at Mahogany Flats, preferably. Yeah. And then you take the whole ridge where you go from, Rogers, Bay, Bennett, and Telescope, all three of them kind of.
Right.
And, but that is a hike.
and most of it is above 10,000 feet.
Right, exactly. So you have to acclimate.
Yeah, you do. The oxygen up there is a little bit thin.
Yeah. Yeah. The 2 times we did telescope, the first time I was successful. Second time I had my son and we had to pull the plug because he was having altitude trouble. So we pulled the plug. But the second time there was a bunch of, in fact, both times there was snow, and this was the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
Last year we came out here in April, late April, and we're going to do Wild Rose, but all the passes were still closed, so we didn't get a chance to do it.
Yeah, fall is a really good time. Even late fall is a really good time to do those hikes, because if there's been any snow accumulation, it hasn't been much.
Right.
So versus in spring, especially on telescope, the main route is a cut to that faces to the east, and so for the really hot part of the day, the sun's shining down on the west side of that, and so from our view, because we sit to the west of telescope, like it looks pretty doable, but there's still that snowdrift, that icy snowdrift like basically just covers the trail, and crampons can be required to do that main trail.
Yeah.
There's another workaround if the west is thawed, but it's a lot more scrambling.
Yeah.
But that hike rewards with views right off the bat.
The vistas are just unbelievable, and they always are. Even off of Wild Rose, they are. The bad thing about it though is in the fall, every time I've been out here in the fall, there have been wildfires, and the smoke has affected the vistas. This is the same thing.
Yeah.
You said that the smoke just did come in fairly recently?
No, we were socked in. We've been socked in for almost a month. Last week, we had some really. It was clear. You could see really well, but it's just started to come back over this weekend, unfortunately. So
Well, the early part of hiking Wild Rose, you can normally see the Sierras, but you couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
It was just, I could look. I knew where they should have been, and I'm sure they were there, but I couldn't see them. But it was wonderful. It was a nice hike. Saw 2 gentlemen. In fact, they were staying here. I saw them this morning, and then I saw them again. They're Frenchmen.
Okay.
But they're Frenchmen, like you said, the Europeans. They're Frenchmen, but they're working here. And one guy was living in California, one guy living in Minneapolis. Because every time I've come here in April or October, it's always a lot of fun because the place is full of Europeans and they're fun to talk to. But with the COVID, not so much.
Yeah. It's been really devastating for the whole region, because Death Valley National Park sees about 70% of its visitation from Europe. So every year, of all the people that visit Death Valley National Park, 60 to 70% come from Europe. And so that doesn't account for the Chinese or the Japanese or the Australians that also come over. This park is way more popular with Europeans than it is with Americans.
Well, I'm
not sure exactly why.
I think it's the heat and it's the wide open spaces. I think that's it. And every time I see a European, I say, wait a minute, let me guess. You flew into Los Angeles, you stayed a little bit there, then you went up to San Francisco, then you went over to Yellowstone. Yosemite, thank you. You went over to Yosemite, and then you went down through Death Valley and through Las Vegas. And they said, well, how did you know?
Yeah.
Because they all do it.
Yep.
Everyone. It's like there's one travel agent in Europe. They all go to this guy, and he says, do this.
Yeah, they call them itineraries.
Yeah.
So, and then there's the inverse of that, where they fly into Vegas.
Right.
And then back out of Vegas. Yeah, it's really a lot of fun. The Europeans are great clientele, and it's really interesting to have the mix of people here at the restaurant, on the patio. It can be really lively. They take their eating, I don't want to say seriously, more sacredly. It's an experience for them. It's not about eating and getting on to the next thing. It's about stopping, and chatting, and tables are chatting with each other, and it's. I mean, we've had people here who met each other that lived in the same town.
Really?
Yeah, and then they go on to be friends, and they'll write to us and let us know like, hey, met